Good afternoon, everybody. This is Michelle Scaife with Better Living for Texans, and today we're going to talk a little bit about another method of food preservation that we can be doing with items that either come in from our garden, that we purchase at the store, we purchase at the farmer's market, or maybe we're gifted from a friend. So today our topic is drying food or dehydrating food. One thing to think about when it comes to drying or dehydrating food is this is one of our oldest recorded methods of food preservation. That can be a little bit reassuring when we think about the fact that over the years, not only has it maintained itself as a valuable and effective form of food preservation, but it hasn't changed that much. Of course, these days we have ovens or appliances like our electronic or electrical food dehydrators, which have only made the process easier, but still a lot of areas and a lot of people still use those tried and true methods. So let's talk a little bit about what that means. If we're drying food or dehydrating food, we're basically simply removing the liquid. Remember that liquid and water are perfect bases, perfect avenues for bacteria to grow. And we want to stop or slow that process. So we're removing the water, and in the process of removing the water, we're reducing bacterial growth. We're also slowing down the natural enzymes in that food that are there to increase spoilage or to cause spoilage. Remember, the plant itself wants its fruit to decay and feed the seeds to create new plants. We want to slow that down and stop that process for as long as possible to make our food shelf stable and efficient for us. So during that process, we will change the food just a little bit. So of course, if you're looking here at some of the things I have in front of me, you can kind of identify what the food is, but they have changed some. A few things that happen when we're dehydrating food is we're going to intensify everything in that food. When you pull that water out of an apple, we are removing moisture, but we're concentrating the sugar. We're concentrating the nutrients, the antioxidants, the minerals that are inside that food. We're also making that serving size smaller. So while one whole apple, which would fit in our hand, is a serving, when it comes to the dehydrated or dried version of an apple, because everything is so concentrated, it's really going to only be about 1/8 of a cup for a serving size of the dehydrated version. Same thing with grapes. Big handful of grapes is a serving, but about 1/8 of a cup of raisins, because of the concentrated sugars, because we've decreased the size of that food, that does change the serving size a little bit. So keep that in mind. We are, of course, retaining nutrients, fiber, minerals, all of that stuff. We're not losing any of the benefits of that food when we dehydrate. We're just removing water and slowing down those enzymes. The most popular methods, there are several. The most popular methods of drying food are open air, which is, as you would expect, simply putting something out on a tray or a mesh surface, or even maybe on a tea towel, putting it out and letting the air dry the food. Now, open air drying requires a few things to be in place. It requires a temperature of at least 85 degrees, and it requires low or no humidity and circulating air. Now, where we live in Montgomery County in the great state of Texas, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of those days. We don't have a lot of days where we have air circulation and low humidity. So for us, where we are, open air drying is not something that we commonly use, even though if you look nationwide, that is still a very practiced form of food dehydration. Just not so much down here in these Piney Woods region. Oven drying, another very popular, very effective, useful method for drying or dehydrating our foods. And as it states, of course, we're going to need an oven. We're going to set our oven on the lowest possible setting. We would like it to be close to 100, 120, 100 degrees. That's usually about as low as most ovens will go, depending upon the age of your oven and whether it's gas or electric. We see variances in different models, so check that, test that, see how far down the temperature setting on your oven goes. So we need our oven set on the lowest setting. We will want to prop that door open 2 to 6 inches So just prop that door open a little bit, and the best thing to do is to set a fan kind of blowing into the oven. That's why the door is popped open, to get some air circulation. That helps to prevent us from cooking the food, prevent us from any mold growth or bacteria growth. We want that warmth, but that air circulation going. Those are the kind of things we need for an oven, but oven drying is wonderful. You can use mesh line trays like these. If you have them or you've purchased them somewhere, they're available mostly online. I really don't see them in stores, but mostly online. Occasionally at your hunting or grilling or camping centers, you'll find dehydration supplies. They may have some of this, or dehydrators themselves available. You can also use a regular baking sheet lined with, this is just a cake cooling rack or a cookie cooling rack. Of course, they come in various sizes and shapes and things like that, but the point is, this gives us a little more air circulation both on the top and the bottom. So we're getting a little bit more air circulation, basically, the best way to put it. So putting our food on there, putting it in the oven, letting it dry for a period of time. Most of our drying times run around 6 to 8 hours, depending on how moist that food is, what size it's cut into, and what method we're using. So oven drying, very popular. Another method is the appliance. Of course, you can see behind me, I have a appliance. This is an electric dehydrator, and this one was gifted to me as a used appliance. It had been used for several years by the family who had it before me. We have had it for almost 20 years, and it's still going strong. This one is fairly large. It has 9 trays. It'll hold 9 trays like this. It does have a temperature dial on it so that you can choose different temperatures for the food that you're drying, but it doesn't have a timer. Some of the newer models do have a timer so that it will shut itself off after a certain period of time, but this one does not. So appliances, very popular. They're all gonna have kind of the same thing. Most of them have temperature gauge. They have a fan that circulates the air in there for you. Many of them now have a timer that will shut them off. They all have trays that stack so that you can do multiple layers of things. They are a bit of an investment, so dehydrators can range in price anywhere from $50 on up. It depends on the make, the model. And I know that in our particular garden group, there are a handful of people that have appliances, dehydrating appliances, and hopefully they'll chime in and share a little information about their dehydrators with you. Another form of dehydration is microwaving, and I know that that's been talked about a couple of times by a few people in our group. Most often we're only hearing dehydrating happening with leafy herbs or leafy greens because they are quick, simple, and easy. You're basically going to place those picked herbs between paper towels, microwave them for a very short period of time, check them, and then maybe go a little bit longer. Your microwave manual is going to be the best resource for whether or not microwaving and dehydrating works for you that way. Again, we don't hear people using microwaves for much other than leafy greens or herbs like that. So, how do we get everything ready? Yep, I'm using notes today. I wanted to stay on track and stay on task. My mind, I don't know about you guys, but is going a million different directions, and the notes are going to help me keep going. So let's talk about how to prepare an item to be dehydrated. Whatever method we've chose to dry this food, what are we going to do? How do we get it ready? So we're going to take that food item, we're going to wash it well, of course, running water, give it a good rinse. We want to remove any blemishes, damaged spots, cuts, bruises. If you have an apple that has a cut in it, just cut that piece out. If you have a peach with a bruise, remove that bruise area. We're going to take the rest of it and we're going to cut it in the size pieces that work best for us. Now, some things we dehydrate whole or halved, but remember, the larger the cut item, the longer it takes to dehydrate. The more moisture that particular item has, the longer it takes to dehydrate. If you think about hot peppers, not overly moist, they're going to take that 6 to 8 hours. But if I'm dehydrating a peach, it's going to take a little longer than that. Lots of moisture in that food. A half of a peach is going to take 12, potentially 18 hours to dehydrate, where if I put it in slices, again, 6 to 8. So bear that in mind as you decide whether to, how you want to cut those foods up before you dry them. Most often for me personally, I'm going to cut them in slices or bite-sized pieces, because when I go to use them later, that's what I'm going to be looking for anyway, is a bite-sized piece or a slice. Example, the apples here are cut into slices. The squash here are cut into bite-sized pieces. The piece I would chop them in to cook with. Once we get those cut, then we're going to decide, is this a food that might oxidize, that might turn brown? Apples, bananas, potatoes particularly tend to brown. Peaches, pears, they tend to kind of turn brown when they've sat in the air for a little while. Now that browning does not make that food unsafe to eat, but many people just don't want to see brown skin potatoes in their dish. So what can we do? We can use the absorbic acid, the fruit fresh type treatments that we talked about when it came to freezing. We could use lemon juice solutions, again, cutting those items to the shape and size that we want them. We would be dipping them into that absorbic acid or lemon juice solution, taking them back out, laying them on the trays, and preparing them to, that would be prepared to go into the dryer. Some people will do what's called a sugar dip or a syrup dip, where they've made a simple syrup, 1 cup sugar to 2 cups water, brought that to a boil, and then dropped their prepared food item into that sugar dip, maybe an apple, a pear, a peach, and then removed it, pat it dry, set it out on your trays. Those are options, but remember, if you're doing a sugar dip, you're adding extra sugar to the item, and that will change the calorie content of that food. Just something to think about. I don't often treat my items before I do them in the dryer. I just don't want to add extra things to it. On occasion, I will put some lemon juice on the apples or on the bananas. Bananas particularly can get a little bit funny looking when you dehydrate bananas. So lemon juice is as much as I ever put into that effort. All right, so we get them on this tray. I don't know if you can really tell. I know it's hard to see. This is leafy herbs. This is actually apple mint from the garden, and I've just spread them out very loosely on the tray. There's lots of room for air to circulate. They're in a single layer. They're really not touching each other. We want that. We want as much air to circulate around things as physically possible. So single layer, single tray. We're going to either put them in the oven that is set for that lowest setting with a fan blowing with the door open, or we're going to put them in our dehydrator and set the time and temperature as it is recommended, either in that manual or in a chart or the National Home Food Preservation recommendations, which I'll try to make sure and put in the link when we post this video. Once this has come out of the dehydrator, our time is done. Our house smells beautiful. Speaking of smells, a couple things you want to think about. Food smells and food flavors can kind of spread to other things. So if I'm dehydrating onions and garlic and peppers, bear in mind it's going to make my house smell like onions, garlics, and peppers, but it's also potentially going to leach those flavors and those fragrances to other foods. If I were doing a row of potatoes with onions and peppers, then potentially those potatoes might absorb some of the flavor and aroma of onions and peppers. So that might be something to think about when you dry different items together. It's fine to dehydrate different things. It's best if they're all similar in drying times, similar uses, similar things. I wouldn't put onions in there with strawberries. That's just not a good mixing. So kind of keep them along the same lines of types of foods and maybe even food uses. That's just something to consider. Once we take it out of the dryer, we're going to just let it set like this. You can tell these have been in the dehydrator. They should sound crisp. I don't know if you can hear that. They should sound crisp when we touch them. They should feel dry to the touch and kind of be obvious that there's not moisture left in them. But we're going to take those trays out and just let them sit in the open air for 5 to 10 minutes, maybe 30 if this is a really thick, dense item like the squash here. We might let that sit for about 30 minutes. We want it to feel cool, no longer warm, like it would be when you first bring it out of the oven or dehydrator. We want it to have cooled and come to temperature. Then we're going to put it into the airtight container that it's going to store in long term. That could be Ziploc-ing type bags. It could be plastic containers. It could be vacuum seal bags. It could also be everyday canning jars. For those of you who do canning, you know that I have probably said it a dozen times. Those lids right here are not second time, they are one-time use. So if I've canned with this particular lid, I can't can with it again because that rubber seal has already been activated and used for preservation. So oftentimes I will reuse those for dehydrated foods, and often will mark on it somehow so I know I can't can with this lid anymore, but this lid could be used in a dehydrated food situation. So as you can see, I've got my foods lined up, different jars, different foods are stored together, different foods are stored separately, but we want them in that airtight container. Now, the first few hours that we've got it in there, if we've just taken these herbs out, we'll say, for example, if these herbs came out of the dehydrator and they've come to room temperature and I put them in this jar and put the lid on it, I need to check that after a few moments or so. And I might want to check it, you know, for an hour or two, maybe check it before I put it back in the pantry, because we want to make sure that no condensation starts to show up here. We call this conditioning the food. If we see moisture start to condense on the jar or the bag or the container, we will want to put those back on the tray and maybe pop them back in the dehydrator for a few more minutes. Maybe it's a real high humidity day here in your home. There's a lot of moisture in the air, and those items need to take a little bit longer than we thought. There's nothing wrong with them. The food is still safe, but we want to, after 2 or 4 hours, to not see any more condensation happening. So as you can see, these are perfectly dry. They sound crunchy. When I shake the jar, there's no moisture on here. So this now can be stored in a cool, dry place out of direct sunlight. If we leave our dehydrated foods in direct sunlight, we are going to end up with some fading of color. It can leach some of the nutrients out. It can encourage some mold growth. Anytime we have mold growth in our dehydrated foods, we unfortunately have to toss them. That's not something that we ever want to consume, is food that has molded and gone bad for us. So use that conditioning method anytime that you dehydrate food and make sure that they're good. I do get asked sometimes, should I put silica packets or moisture absorbers in with my foods? It is an additional expense. It's not a problem. You can do it, yes. Make sure they're food grade, that they are approved for food use, to be stored with foods, because some are not. You wouldn't take a silica pack out of a pair of new shoes you bought and put them in here, because that is not a food grade moisture absorber. So it can be done. It's not required to be done. Something I get asked all the time, what on earth do you dehydrate? Dehydration, drying, is a method of food preservation that I've used in my home forever, all these years. My grandparents used it, I use it, I taught my children this, so yes, we do actually utilize dehydration in the home. I make granola in my food dehydrator, which we'll have that recipe out tomorrow, FYI. I make crackers in my dehydrator, but I also dehydrate many vegetables. So you can see I have herbs here, some for cooking, some herbs are for tea. I have peppers. I do a lot of peppers in my dehydrator. Apples are a favorite, bananas, any type of fruit is wonderful and delicious. I also dehydrate several vegetables, because that way they are shrunk down in size. They are easy, small, compact. Remember, we're taking a big old squash and breaking it down, I mean, this is a good 2.5 pounds of squash just in one jar. So we're making it compact, shelf stable, easy to store. Another thing that I do that I guess not a lot of people really know about is powders. So this is a vegetable powder. This has in it various colored sweet and hot peppers. It has squash, it has herbs. There are leafy greens like kale in it, and all I've done is dehydrated them just like this, and then I put them in the food processor and make them powdered. Now to this, I could add something salty. Basically, if you think about chicken or beef broth bouillon, soup starters, right? We've just made the veggie version right here. This is a great way to make excess produce, even fruits, you can do this with fruits, very compact, very small, and very easy to store, but also easy to use. So this vegetable powder goes into anything. When I'm baking or roasting meats, add a little salt to this, gives us a nice crust on the outside. You can put some in broths, soups, stews. You can add it to just about anything to get a little extra nutrition in there. When it comes to the fruit powder versions, most times those are going to go into smoothies, but they can also be stirred into oatmeals or breakfast bakes of any kind. So there we have it. This is dehydration or food drying. This is kind of how we do it, what we do with it, and let me know what you think. Is this something that you think might work for you? Is this something that you could do in your own home? I didn't really address it much. You can dehydrate meats, make jerkies and things like that. We don't see a lot of that kind of where we live in this region because of, again, that humidity and that moisture, but it is something that can be done. We do have the National Home Food Preservation website, which is readily available to us at all times. It has a great deal of information, timing, and charts for drying, dehydrating, preserving foods. So of course that's a great resource. But if you have questions about dehydration, drying foods, preserving foods of any kind, please feel free to reach out to me. You can drop a comment, send me a message, an email, a telephone call. I'm here for you to help you out, and we want you to be confident in your food preservation, and we want the food to be safely preserved so that it's there for you when you need it. So thanks for joining me today. Had a great talk. Again, ask any questions that you need, and we will see you next time. Have a great day.